The superhero fandom couldn't contain themselves when Invincible finally got a TV series of its own in 2021. Getting the recognition it deserved for so long, Invincible was the perfect comic to adapt into a TV series for this generation of fans bored with the big players' sunshine and roses approach. And if you're here, you probably love all things Mark Grayson. In this video, I'll discuss the story of arguably the coolest alternate Mark Grayson. Delving deep into the Invincible comics, let's get to it. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin. Sinister Mark, Cannibal Mark, Alternate Mark 16. Other than Mark Grayson Prime, there are about 16 alternate significant Graysons, the sinister Cannibal Mark being the 16th. What makes him so different from the rest? Why is he a cannibal? Let's explore his story from Invincible issues number 103 and number 104. How did mainstream Mark end up finding sinister Cannibal Mark? Angstrom Levy spits his morning coffee as he reads the newspaper. Invincible is allegedly alive, and that has ruined his day. Meanwhile, back in the new Guardians of the Globe space base, Rex finds the same news. He's visibly seething over the fact that Cecile not only let Invincible go unpunished for the deaths he caused by working with Dinosaurus, but also let Invincible take credit for stopping Dinosaurus. In Grayson's residence, Eve accidentally uses her powers, which causes a big scare. Sherry had already warned her that using her powers during her pregnancy could be harmful to the baby. Terrified, she calls Sherry in the middle of the night. Sherry confirms her suspicions by using her powers on Eve's belly. She once again warns Eve that her body needs to feed off something due to her nature of powers. Having already accelerated her digestion due to using her powers, her body couldn't feed her child. Using her powers could lead to her body drawing energy from her child instead. The scene shifts to the last Viltrumite warship stationed on the moon, where Nolan and his prisoner Thrag are having a conversation. Thrag warns Nolan that his ways are those of the weak. When the Viltrumites realize that, they will find it unacceptable. They will soon assassinate or abandon Nolan. Nolan emphasizes that his way is new and that he began his rule by letting Thrag live. Thrag must continue to live to see the changes Nolan will induce. That is his proper punishment. Later in the day, Eve heads off to visit her non-superhero friends while Mark is out and about doing his job. Of course, Mauler is back with his usual shenanigans and picks a fight with Invincible yet again. Mark is surprised to find out Mauler survived, but Mauler rightfully points it out. He's a genius who clones himself. What are the chances he'd genuinely die? Mauler struggles to keep up with Invincible this time, finding he's grown considerably stronger compared to the last time they fought each other. Eve returns home after fighting some traffic instead of the usual supervillains. She finds the eerie silence in her home weird, but before she can think too much, she's ambushed by Angstrom Levy. Levy had expected to see Mark's mother, but Eve is probably an even better victim. Mark makes it back just in time, but he's sent through a portal immediately. Crashing headfirst into what seems to be an abandoned wasteland, Mark comes across another version of himself, munching on other dead Invincibles. The fate of mainstream Mark and Sinister Mark. Continuing from the last issue's cliffhanger ending, Cannibal Mark and Mainstream Mark have a conversation. Mainstream Mark recognizes the cannibal. He's one of the 8 Levy had brought forth in his dimension. Cannibal Mark explains how they were left with nothing out here in the wasteland, and they did what they could to survive and stave off hunger. He was the only survivor when they all had fought to eat each other. Lunging at the new fresh meat in front of his eyes, Cannibal Mark attacks actual Mark and explains how he is desperate for a fight. It turns out that starving didn't make him that much weaker after all. Mark's promise to take Cannibal back to his home dimension fell on deaf ears as he continued to attack Mark, trying to bite his face. Back at Grayson's residence, Eve wants to use her powers but refrains from doing so, and Levy realizes that his victim isn't powerless like he had expected. He quickly learns that Mark ends up with Adam Eve in this reality. Finding it strange that Eve wouldn't attack him even when her life was at stake, he figures she must have been pregnant. Levy goes on a rant about various dimensions across the multiverse. He initially set out to find all the evil Mark Graysons he could. Most dimensions were polar opposites, such as good and evil being different from the usual norm. Some were intertwined with Nolan and the Viltrumite Empire. It all caused different outcomes for Mark, such as not being allowed to grow up on Earth. He asks her if she knows how Mark turns to the dark side. The most common element in all those dimensions where Mark snapped and turned to evil were the ones where Eve was hurt or killed. Levy commands Eve to keep her powers away since she could endanger her unborn child without being sure of her own survival. Besides, she's safe until Mark's back since he wants to kill her in front of him. Back in the wasteland, it's clear to mainstream Mark that the cannibal version of him outpaces him in one-on-one combat. Just as when he's thrown to the ground, he's saved by an unknown Mark and they both escape from Cannibal Mark. Get this alternate Mark has a mohawk. Mark and Mohawk Mark decide to fight against the cannibal and fly out. Mohawk Mark soon reveals he had helped Cannibal Mark with their first victim. Not a moment later, they're intercepted by Cannibal. At Grayson's residence, Eve tells Levy that she knows all about his origin story from Mark. His failed experiment consumed all the alternate Levy's minds to combine the multiverse's memory into his own. Levy had pulled himself out of the machines in order to save Mark from the Muller twins and their clones. She doubts the memories within Levy and points out that the failed experiment could have led him to blame Mark for his condition falsely. Levy argues that regardless of Mark's intention, he caused an interruption to the experiment and must die for that. Eve tells Levy how he had indirectly killed her ex-boyfriend Rex. Rex sacrificed himself to stop one of the evil Invincibles brought into their dimension by Levy. She talks about how the death of Rex changed her life, but instead of focusing on revenge, she built her life and now she's happy where she is. She then asks Levy if he had ever considered giving up on a revenge plot against Mark when he had never intentionally harmed Levy in the first place. He could move on and pursue his original mission. That leaves Levy quite speechless. Meanwhile, the duo of Invincibles make short work of Cannibal and a portal opens up. Mainstream Mark immediately flies back into his home dimension, followed by the Mohawk Mark. Mainstream Mark stops the Mohawk Mark from killing Levy since that would leave them with no options. The Mohawk Mark reveals that he was promised to be able to invade all other dimensions for his empire, but was instead abandoned by Levy. In a brief moment of peace, Levy explains that he had gone far astray from his original plan and that the information overload from the experiment surely crossed some wires in his psyche. Levy points out Mark's cruelty and evil in many dimensions and that it should be a cause of concern for mainstream Mark. He also concludes that there were some dimensions where Mark was genuinely kind and selfless, and perhaps this was one of those dimensions. He surrenders and apologizes to Eve for the hurt he's caused everyone. He opens a portal for the Mohawk Mark, but the Mohawk Mark takes Levy with him. Mainstream Mark and Eve console each other, and Mark has an idea for his next move. They meet Rex, who points out that although he had replicated the portal tech before, it had taken his counterpart 15 years to do so. Mark resolves to find him one way or another. Backstory of Sinister Mark, the Cannibal Invincible. Now that we've gone over how Mainstream Mark meets Cannibal Mark, let's talk about how he ended up in the wasteland in the first place. Sinister Mark most likely turned evil because his mother was killed, and his home dimension's general evil disposition didn't help much in that regard. Sinister Mark eventually created an empire and became the vilest being in his dimension. He developed a strange taste for human flesh when trying to find ways to torture his victims. He was later approached by Angstrom Levy, who proposed that he expand his empire beyond the home dimension. Sinister Mark then agreed to Levy's plan and participated in Levy's Invincible War. He initially follows Levy's plans, but later decides to tell him off when the mainstream dimension is in shambles and only 8 Marks are alive out of them all. Levy tells him that the offensive is just the first phase, and the second would bring mainstream Mark to him for punishment. Sinister Mark tells the others to move on to a new dimension or destroy Levy. Angstrom doesn't take it lightly and banishes the 8 to an alternate dimension, a wasteland without food or water. Over time, the 8 talk and bond over the cause of their turning evil. They remain stranded for weeks on end with no food or water. Realizing the 8th one is a jerk, they eat him, leading to Mohawk Mark flying away from them. The 7 slowly consumed each other until only 3 remained. Mark 8 and Sinister Mark 8 Mark 17. Sinister Mark reminisced about how he enjoyed the taste of human flesh back in his home dimension. Sinister Mark would finally go insane and attempt to kill everyone else. At this moment, a portal opens and Mainstream Mark meets Sinister Mark. Mohawk Mark remains the last survivor along with Mainstream Mark. They both return to the Prime's dimension after killing Sinister Mark. Marvelous verdict. Yeah, so it's a fitting ending for a horrible alternate Mark. Cannibal Invincible, or Sinister Mark, was genuinely repulsive. Still, I can't help but sympathize with him. His home dimension was known for its people being more evil in general, and his mother's death took a significant toll on his psyche. I can only imagine a powerful being in a dimension where everyone is skewed to the dark side and doesn't have much incentive to be good. It was a bad ending for Sinister Mark, but considering he could let his inner cannibal Invincible out freely, perhaps not? I'll leave that for you to decide. Thanks for watching, and see you in our next video. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.